Welcome to the Cummer Museum's Culture and Conversation. I am Attire, Dr. Attire Abdel-Malik. My husband said that doctorate degree costs a lot of money. You are Dr. Attire Abdel-Malik, one of the newest board members here at the Cummer Museum of Art and Gardens. And we are in for such a treat tonight. Kim Jenkins is joining us. Her brilliance, her activism, her movement, her magic. She's going to take us on a deeper journey through the sociocultural and historical lens behind why we wear what we wear. Kim is an assistant professor of fashion studies at Ryerson University in Toronto, Canada. Born in Detroit, the Motor City, raised in Texas, Kim has taught at Parsons School of Design and Pratt Institute in New York City. She's known for a lot of things, from creating courses to serving as a consultant for Gucci. In 2017, Kim developed the Fashion and Race Database, a movement in its own right, created to share knowledge, amplify diverse perspectives, and challenge dominant narratives. We are so happy to have you. Please join me in welcoming the Kim Jenkins.
Thank you, Dr. Attire. It's an honor, and that might be the best introduction I've ever had with my speaking. I'm going to have to send it to my parents. Thank you. They'll be proud. Thank you, everyone, for joining this evening. I'm going to take you on a journey of the work that I do and what kind of brought me here and what my work makes possible for us in the fashion and art space and the culture space. So what I'm going to do is start sharing a screen and taking you through a slideshow, because I'm a visual person and I like to kind of show everything I do. So let's get into it here. Okay, all right. Okay, so what I'm going to introduce you to tonight is my baby, the Fashion and Race Database, a labor of love, building a platform for education and representation. So first of all, I want to thank Dr. Tia and Emily from the Cummer Museum for inviting me. It's just a thrill to be here with you all. So again, let's get started, and I want to take you inside the Fashion and Race Database and get to tell you a little bit more about the work that I do. Before we get started, I just want to first introduce you to this image here. This is an image, a collage, that was commissioned by the Fashion and Race Database, designed by Barbara Estriel, aka Museo de Moda, out of Mexico City. We found her beautiful Instagram account, and we were thinking of who do we want to, if we wanted to commission some art, who would that be? And we thought of Barbara, and she graciously created these collages for us. And so it's very meaningful. When I was consulting with her, I was just kind of expressing what, if you were to make a collage of fashion for fashion and race, what would it look like? And so I was thinking the business of fashion, the consumption. So you see here, shopping bags. You see these shopping bags exalted. If you look kind of like towards the bottom, you'll see these shopping bags. They're lifted up by these black hands and arms, kind of these disembodied hands and arms that are holding up a bowl. What that means, that she beautifully conveyed, is just sort of how, if you ask my dear friend and colleague, Dr. Jonathan Michael Square out of Harvard and FIT and Parsons, he'll tell you that the textile and fashion industry was really created in the 19th century off the backs of enslaved people. So behind many of the things that we wear for time immemorial, it has been through, unfortunately, the exploitation of labor. So that's why you see these sort of black hands holding up these shopping bags. And then you see what could be sort of clouds, but really I see them as mounds of cotton, speaking to the 19th century and enslavement and the harvesting of cotton. And cotton was king, this material that kind of quite literally wove together the tapestry of our country and other countries as well. Just kind of touching on a couple more pieces, you'll see this sort of elegant dress suspended, this kind of classic draped dress. You'll also see a 1960s, I believe, Chinese film star at the top, sort of a vintage photo of her. And that just kind of speaks to a section that we have on the Fashion Race database called Our Fashion History, which I'll explain further. It's a section where we invite people to submit photos of family members from racialized communities so that we can expand what fashion history looks like by building this collection of family photos to show how our mothers, our fathers, our grandparents, our great-grandparents dressed. Because all too often, and I know this closely because I've been in the field for almost 10 years now, the fashion history, the iconography of fashion history and the image we see and the images we remember or commemorate and see as fashionable are oftentimes very homogenous and very white. So, I'll explain further of what the Fashion Race database seeks to do in addressing these issues at a time like this. So a little bit about me. I come from the field of fashion studies. I have a background in cultural anthropology and art history from UT Arlington in Texas. And when I was looking to further my studies in anthropology and connect my love of fashion, at that time, I loved fashion as a teenager. But by the time I got into my late teens and early 20s, at that time, I thought that there's no way that you could study fashion and be an intellectual at the same time. Or there's no way you could study fashion and do something in ethnic studies or philosophy or examining politics or psychology or anything like that. And so it wasn't until about a couple of years later, after I graduated with my BA in anthropology and art history, I discovered a brand new program that had come out in New York at Parsons School of Design in 2010 called Fashion Studies. And it was an interdisciplinary field, a new kind of field that does exactly that. It sort of threads fashion through the lens of psychology, politics, economics, religion even, and many other things, anthropology, art history, sociology. I was in heaven. I dropped everything. Growing up in Texas, I dropped everything and just moved to New York because I knew I had to be part of this program. And it just so happened they had just started. So I was in the second ever graduating cohort from 2011 to 2013. They weren't quite sure what you could do with a degree like this, but I knew what I could do with a degree like this. It was so exciting. And I knew with the things that we were learning about why we wear what we wear, and this idea that dress is not just this object that can sit on a mannequin in a museum, but it's also a phenomenon, something that we all do, unless you are a nudist. It is something much like food that we all engage with, whether you like to admit it or not. Oftentimes when I start saying this in a classroom, people think of this iconic scene in the film The Devil Wears Prada, where Anne Hathaway's character proudly tells Meryl Streep's character, you know, because she's a literary figure. She just thinks, oh, I have nothing to do with fashion. I have no interest in fashion. But Meryl Streep just breaks her down and lets her know that sweater you're wearing, it is really the product of the trickle down effect of a top designer who had this idea of this blue sweater, and then it worked and moved its way down market to the shop that you probably purchased this. So all of that is to say, we are all involved in fashion, whether you believe it or not. And but oftentimes people are just kind of referring to or thinking of the stigma of fashion. They think it's frivolous. It is superficial. It can be those things, but my work seeks to prove that there is so much more than that. There is depth to the study of fashion. In fact, we use the word fashion as a verb also, not just a noun. The way you fashion your body, your identity, the decisions that you make every single day to put yourself together, even the decisions you make to show that you don't care about fashion is a decision. It's a negotiation. So that's why I love fashion studies so much. And so I graduated in 2013 with my MA in fashion studies, and just kind of hit the ground running. I was lucky enough to get a job teaching at my now alma mater, Parsons School of Design, in the fall of 2013, as well as Pratt Institute. So for the next 7 years, I went on to teach classes like fashion history, fashion theory, so why we wear what we wear, explaining this to students in the classroom, fashion culture, New York fashion being a class that kind of has students examine what is it about a city that shapes what we wear? How does what we wear shape a city? So things like that. And then of course, in the context of this conversation tonight, I then created in 2016 a class called Fashion and Race. I had figured, I've spent about 3 years at this point teaching. And I had noticed that there wasn't a great deal of material being taught in my field about fashion and race. Of course, it was something that many people did not want to touch. It's a very tender topic, and it needs to be kind of handled surgically. Who wants to address this? And what would a class like that look like? And so I started kind of drawing outlines over a summer of 2016 of what, if you were to teach a class called Fashion and Race, what would it involve? And the class that I developed, which went on to become very popular at Parsons and ran for about 3 years, I started off with why race? Where does race come from? Where does this construct come from? What are the implications of race, of racializing individuals, creating this caste system, as Isabel Wilkerson in her book Caste would call it, this hierarchy from skin tone, facial features, hair texture. And so then I also take students through examples of how racialized figures are presented in art history, in fashion history, looking at old Gazette images. And then we go into cultural appropriation, but historicizing it, not just cultural appropriation as you see it in the news headlines in the last 5 years, going all the way back and into 1940s and beyond. Carmen Miranda, all these figures who have kind of appropriated or misappropriated the styles, the material culture of other individuals, of racialized or ethnic communities, and tried it on for size and performed in it. What are the implications of that? We also talk about beauty standards. Where do these Westernized beauty standards come about, and how did they come to dominate culture, to where you have mainly women all around, and identified women all around the world seeking to meet this one ideal, this one Westernized ideal where everyone's nose looks the same, everyone's skin tone looks the same, everyone's hair looks the same. Where does this come from? And so the anthropologist in me was very excited because I seemed to kind of strike gold in being able to talk about fashion and get really intellectual about these things, and also talk about the way human beings behave, which is what anthropologists do and sociologists do. So we would talk about things like that, and also the business of fashion, retail discrimination, and diversity and inclusion, which has become sort of a hot button issue in the last few years in fashion. So the lack of diversity. So those are all the things that I've gone over in the last few years. And this work that I've done, from not just fashion and race, but making fashion history fun to talk about, talking about why we wear what we wear. I truly enjoy making my work public. And that is not like all academics or intellectuals. Some people really love to kind of keep it inside the ivory tower. I'm someone who loves to talk to anyone who will listen about these things. I want to talk to people in law, in tech, in medicine, in economics. and get them interested in this. And as such, by 2019, I had become known for just being so kind of open and friendly with my academic knowledge that the new school had introduced me, or really suggested that Gucci, who had been in town in New York in early 2019, that they meet me. They were in the middle of a crisis, a cultural crisis, with something that they had designed. And so the new school said, well, you need to meet Kim. She's one of our lecturers here. So one thing led to another, where we joined forces, and they brought me out to Milan a couple of times, and I went to Hong Kong. And so I was flying the world, being able to teach this work to the industry. So not just keeping it in the classroom, but really getting to talk to fashion designers, which was incredibly exhilarating. And here's a picture here. I have evidence. To be able to sit down with the CEO and president of Gucci and just kind of talk about fashion and race, and talk to Alessandro Michele, who's there on the far left, about the work that I do, and why it matters, and how it can help the industry make wiser decisions, or more culturally sensitive and informed and intelligent decisions. So by 2016, 2017, I started to work, stepping back a couple of years before this moment with Gucci. I decided to create a web platform, and I call it the Fashion and Race Database Project at the time, because I wasn't sure where it was going. And so I thought, well, if I'm building this fashion and race class, and I'm finding all of these exciting resources like books, articles, exhibitions, podcast episodes, collecting all of these sources that build evidence and tell us a little bit more about these intersections of fashion and race and racism, I know other people could use this, such as other educators, curators, students all around the world, industry leaders. So I start kind of doing this research and collection in public, if you will, by purchasing one of those out-of-the-box websites. And I just start putting all the books on the website that I'm using. It just becomes a sort of glorified list or spreadsheet of resources that I had found. And so next thing I know, over the next couple of years, I start getting emails or even phone calls from people saying, thank you for building this source. I needed this for a thesis or my dissertation, or this is helping me at work. I'm going to share this with my colleagues. And especially by last year, which I'm going to go into in a moment here, when we hit a quote unquote racial reckoning, it just kind of went out of control at that point. So we find that fashion and race becomes suddenly relevant. Suddenly racism exists. So this was purely coincidental, but by this point, I was offered a job in Toronto, Canada, to be a full-time professor and to bring my fashion and race work there. And because again, to be honest with you, there's people who can speak about this, but honestly, in the world of fashion and in fashion academia, there just weren't many people that people could just think of off the top of their heads who were doing this work in earnest. And, so I had suddenly become the person whenever someone's thinking about fashion and race or fashion and racism, it was me. And so when I got hired, I had access to support and funding from the university to be able to take the database to the next level, from this sort of out of the box website to something more robust, something more formal. So this was exciting because it meant I got to hire a real web developer who could design a polished website that could take this work to the next level and make it look like you're entering a museum, almost an online museum or an online library or a school or an institute. That's the look I was going for. And I wanted it to be something where anyone could just sit sit at home on their laptop and just really get lost in the stacks and in all of the resources that we had put together. And I knew I couldn't do it alone at this point. I was building the website or maintaining it completely by myself. And so by June, at the end of the semester at Ryerson, I knew I needed some help. So I hired an old classmate, a friend of mine from the fashion studies program, and to help me manage it. And then we hired interns from Ryerson University who were fabulous. Adriana Hill and Safia Sheikh were our very first interns and research assistants who really helped build the database into what it is. They did a lot of heavy lifting with just kind of adding all of these sources to the site, but I'll show you what that looks like in a little bit. But we end up launching or relaunching the Fashion and Race Database July 8th, 2020. And as I was saying, you know, with the death of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and countless other names that I know you've all heard now at this point, that it was sobering because suddenly it just sort of cracked open the space for the need for my work. And so by June and July, the phone is ringing off the hook. You have people just saying, we need help. This is a crisis. Help us. You know, what do we need to know about fashion and race? So Vogue reached out and did a piece on the launch of the Fashion and Race Database in July. And the next thing you know, that same week we were featured in The Guardian, and it just kind of really took on a life of its own by that point. I was speaking with Robin Givhan in August at the Washington Post, who was doing an article called Fashion's Racial Reckoning. And she had already known me for about over a year at that point because she was following my work with Gucci. And so once, you know, come back a year later, she wanted to see if I was still doing this work. She felt it was needed more than ever at this point. And what does this mean? Is this a movement or is this a moment? And so that's what many people were asking. So you see the fashion industry, as well as all of its institutions, scrambling. This racial reckoning just really shed a light or kind of turned all the lights on with what was going inside of fashion businesses, museums, archives, schools. It had us sort of reassess diverse representation in these spaces. I know the art community is having the same conversation. I mean, it hit everyone, and various other industries also. But on a positive note, this also created a saturation of work and these opportunities to amplify the voices of racialized designers, artists, writers, thinkers, activists. You had companies listening and learning and hiring diversity and inclusion officers and really just trying to make matters right. So then another month later, I hear from Vanessa Friedman at the New York Times, and she's working on a piece now after Robin Givhan, and it's called The Incredible Whiteness of the Museum Fashion Collection. And so I was included in that piece as sort of a fashion and race, an expert or someone to provide insight into this problem and what can museums do to alleviate this issue? What needs to be done? We need to perform an audit of the fashion museums. You know, how diverse are these collections? And if they're not diverse, why? And it's deeper. It goes deep because I've now been consulting with a major museum and in listening to their staff. It's just, when you look at it holistically in examining what a museum is going through right now with this, it's sort of, we don't have diverse collections because we don't have people who had a collection of diverse designers. You know, our collections are only as good as the acquisitions we get from kind of women, wealthy women, these socialites who give us clothes and their accessories. And then if you want to diversify our collection and get pieces from designers of color, good luck, because you haven't built relationships with them due to systemic oppression. They have just been, they've gone forgotten. They've remained underrepresented. They've struggled through the industry, many of them. And I'm talking, designers from 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago. They didn't have the support they needed to keep their collections and their pieces, their portfolios in kind of archival storage. So you have probably genius collections and portfolios done by Black designers or artists and designers of color that have been lost, burned, deteriorated from not being properly cared for, forgotten, So, I mean, it's just, how do you recapture history at this point? And so this is what we're dealing with. And a museum in that way feels in some ways that their hands are tied, that, when it comes to white designers who've had it far better than Black designers and designers of color, they've had all of these pieces, and they've been sort of protected and supported to where they can pass down these pieces, and the right patrons or the right ladies wear their clothes and then hold on to them and keep them stored and then give them to a museum. So it's quite complicated in what these museums will do. And it's a losing battle, because the museums, even if they wanted to diversify, they're going to struggle to diversify their collections. They can't. And you've got this whole gallery of people on social media, or the public audience, looking at them and telling them, you're not diverse, you're not doing the work. And so, what do you do? So why this work matters. I'm not sure if I can save a whole museum, but I can consult with them, but I do know what I can do, and that is create a virtual or digital space that provides an accessible academic treatment to one of fashion, in my mind, one of fashion's most critical topics facing us today. This picture I took from my class at Parsons, Fashion and Race. And I ran this class for over 3 years, and only ran it I only stopped running it at Parsons because I got the job at Ryerson in Toronto. This was an assignment that we did. I'd take them on a field trip to the new school library, and they would go through an image analysis. So in the library, these books that you see here are actually bound magazines of Vogue and Bazaar. And so they're going through issues from, say, 1968, 1978, 1998. And the exercise was for students to pick a cover or an editorial collection, an editorial spread, and write a short paper about it where you're unpacking that image. And when I say unpacking, I'm asking you to really read into this image. First of all, is it diverse? What is this image telling you? If you were to read into this image, when you're looking at the power dynamics, maybe of two models or two figures in the image, who's in power and who is not? Are they relinquishing power? Are they, is it sustained? So things like that. Just getting students to think critically when they look, not just at art, and I borrow a lot from the art world in doing this, but when they're looking at a fashion image, what do they see there if you were to read into the image? So just a brief introduction here to how I laid out the Fashion and Race database. The Fashion and Race database can be found at fashionandrace.org if you want to follow along on your phone or on a laptop to the side. But what you will see there is 6 key areas. The library, objects that matter, profiles, essays and opinion, the directory, and the calendar. And I've got an image here of a relative. I inherited photos from my mom, and this is an unknown relative from the 1930s in my family photo collection. So wanted to add that there to let you know that we're here and we're fashionable. So the library, I want to take you into the library first. So this is one of our most popular areas, especially if you are a researcher or if you want to learn or you want to know. Go to the library, and it is exactly what you might think it is. It is a digital library that we created where we have stocked books. We've got about 400 books now in there. scholarly articles, but not just scholarly articles, popular articles, newspaper, magazine articles you'll find. Links to lectures and panel discussions, films, documentaries, online exhibitions, podcast episodes. So this is just sort of, these images here just kind of show you the array of resources that we store there that is for you to enjoy. And on topic with our, in celebration of our exhibition for Mohali, you will find Mohali's work inside our exhibition and archives. This is archived. So when you see the exhibitions, because you may notice this is from this exhibition is from 2019. When you go into our exhibitions and archive section, you will see kind of stored or past exhibitions. So we've had Mohali's work here, which is just fits beautifully into the kind of work that we're looking for when people want to know what is fashion and race, or what does that look like, or what kind of sources do you have on fashion and race. The sources you will find examine the impacts of course, racism, colonialism, art. You'll find designers, artists, and also researchers and scholars who are going into the implications of race and colonialism when it comes to image making, dominant narratives that circulate that we've gone on to believe or become a dominant worldview that impact our lives and contribute to systemic oppression. You'll find numerous things, lectures and panels of intellectuals kind of going back and forth and talking about this. So we talk about fashion and race in a way that historicizes the impact and explains to you where all this comes from. We also have pieces like this that provide this commentary in a creative way. So artists like and activists like Mohali, how they are engaging with that history and interrogating it in various ways. So there's ways of doing this. So Objects That Matter is another section, and it is actually now become our most popular section. And it's really our signature that I'm quite proud of because it's really one of a kind. Objects That Matter, and why it's called Objects That Matter, is the fact that we pick an object, and an object can be something that you wear, like it could be an accessory, it could be a garment, it can be a piece of ephemera, it could be a photograph or a magazine cover or an object made with racist intent. It could be an object that is made as a symbol of empowerment. So it could be an Afro pick or it can be a Star of David. Why these two objects matter and need to be memorialized is because we need to put it there, historicize it, explain its harm, its impact, or how it is empowering, like in the case of this Afro pick and this Black is Beautiful movement, for instance. And so we pick an object, and you'll see a series of objects that run the gamut from Black culture, Filipino culture, Indian culture, Jewish culture is what I want to work on next. And so the objects first, whenever you go inside an Objects That Matter post, what you're first going to see, and this is all a teaching tool, it's done with intention, is you're going to see the images of the object in the way that it was originally made and when it was first created, or its original context. And it's almost like an encyclopedia entry, because what you'll see is a write-up that educates you about this object. At the bottom though, and this is what makes it a signature for us, is that you'll see a section called Appropriation and Influence, and it'll start showing you examples of people or fashion brands or moments where people have adopted, appropriated, or misappropriated that object, wearing it out of context or wearing it as homage, so that you can kind of draw that connection of, okay, I just learned about how this piece is supposed to be worn or what this piece originally came from. And now here I am confronted with ways that people clearly don't have knowledge or education about it, and they're wearing it in a completely harmful or inappropriate way. Or here's an example of an artist who took that object and twisted it or subverted it and, you know, and made some meaning out of it, or is referencing it with pride. Profiles is pretty similar to Objects That Matter. That is a section we're still growing. But what we plan to have there are figures, racialized figures, predominantly, who you're getting a bit of history about. So they're designers, artists, creatives, magazine editors even, people who you should know about. So just a profile in the context of fashion and race. So were they a famous ally in fashion, or were they a famous underrepresented designer? Essays and Opinion is pretty self-explanatory, but it's really created a great space for us to invite contributors who have been wanting to looking for a space to talk about fashion and race. It's kind of novel once you start exploring these areas. You do see things that are technically maybe a fashion and race conversation written in a newspaper article or a magazine. But there aren't many dedicated spaces at this level, at this robust level, that specifically talk about fashion and race or fashion and colonialism and the impacts, giving you not just all of the resources to learn more about it, but also kind of real-time writing and essays. In fact, we just launched, I don't have it here because it's so new, we just launched a new section inside Essays and Opinion called In the News, where we have a curated roundup every 2 weeks of things happening in the news. We explain why these news items matter, and we make references to history or sources inside of our library. So say you're looking at, we're explaining a news item, some issue that happened recently. And we'll note that this isn't so new. In fact, you can reference, fill in the blank source in our library, which will educate you on why this issue is still happening in the news today. So that's what makes us unique. Another section that I really like is called Our Fashion History. And this is slowly growing. This is an area where we invite contributors to send us family photos and insert themselves into fashion history, co-author the narrative of fashion history with us by showing that you are here. And I think that is so powerful to be able to kind of insert yourself and make your presence known. One of our past contributors, Aaron Francis, who has an Instagram account called Vintage Black Canada, which is sort of a minority in a minority. He wants to let you know, yes, there's a whole Black history in Canada. People talk about Black history in the United States, but we're here, we're out here. And so he tells this beautiful story about his uncle, Errol Francis, who was actually a popular musician and won a Juno, which is the Canadian Grammy Award. And this is Uncle Errol, as you may assume, over to the right, and how he used to dress in the 80s. And so, it's just really fun. And you'll find more when you look at this particular piece, which is called Vintage Black Canada, I believe. You will see some more of the family photos that Aaron shares with you. And then we also have a section called the Directory and the Calendar that just keeps you on the pulse of exhibitions, like the Mahali exhibition you can find there, and the Directory, which I'm going to come to next. But the calendar lets you know this exhibition is happening, or there's a talk that's going to be similar to, on the topic of fashion and race coming up. In fact, there was a talk that happened about a month or so ago by one of the authors inside the Fashion and Race database, Dr. Sabrina Strings, author of this book here, Fearing the Black Body, this book that you'll see here at the top left. She was giving a talk. And so it's always exciting to see that, because it just shows that this work is still going. And this isn't just some stuffy book stuffed in a library. There is a live professor who is out here speaking about this work, and you can catch her. So we've got that. So the directory has been something that Kai Marcel, one of our research assistants, we've been working on and kind of fleshing out what the directory in the Fashion Race database does is it enables us to salute all the people and create faces to all these names behind all of these books and all of this research doing this work. And I'll show you what that looks like in a moment. The database also brings the work of fashion studies, this field I've been telling you about, to the world stage and proposing critical solutions to the industry and like Gucci and societal issues. We're working on collaborations with artists, writers, scholars, researchers. In fact, we just landed our very first major brand partnership with Tommy Hilfiger, which was announced in Women's Wear Daily in February. So stay tuned. We're working on a major collaborative research project that's really kind of one of a kind, where you have a major global fashion brand working with a bunch of brainiacs in fashion to produce research that makes sense to not only us, but to this fashion brand, and just showing this bridge that we can build from academia into industry. And also it's going to create new virtual learning spaces and methods for cultivating online communities. So I want to start rolling out classes, online classes that are available to the public or global. And so when you go inside the directory, we've got it broken down by like designers and artists, other databases and online sources that you can find, institutions, educators, scholars doing this work, shops, content creators. So it's really your one-stop shop for all of this work. And so, so I'll just show you here. This is what the directory looks like if you were to click on educators and scholars and just kind of take a look around. And again, just like what I was saying about Vintage Black Canada, it is so powerful. You know, it's one thing to look at a bunch of resources in our library and books and just see names, but when you see the faces, you know, this is what really kind of matters to me, because oftentimes you have people say, you know, I'd be interested in this work, but, you know, where are the Black scholars? Or, you know, if universities need to diversify, they quickly say, well, I don't know where they are. I don't know where to find the Black scholars. I don't know if they exist, or the researchers. Are there any? Maybe there's 3. Here they all are. So you can just see them all in one place. I will close it there because I'd love to see if any of you have questions, or you want to have a conversation about this. You can follow and support this work, finding me at Kimberly M. Jenkins, or if you just want to follow the Fashion Race database, it's Fashion Race database. My website, Kimberly M. Jenkins. And you can also subscribe to our newsletter, fashionandrace.substack.com, just to keep up with what we're doing. Thank you very much. So one question we have here is, how often is the Objects That Matter section of the database updated? Is there a place to suggest objects for the database to highlight? Yes. The Objects That Matter section, we are a small but mighty team, but we're small. And so when it comes to how often we can kind of really sit down and write out these objects that matter, you know, ideally, if we had the funding, we would have kind of a slightly larger team or the ability to spend more time on this. So that would be churning them out once a week. But right now, we have, gosh, they're coming like once a month, unfortunately, right now. But we do take requests. If you go to the website and click on the drop down about, you will find our contact us page. And then there's a drop down there where you can kind of suggest an Objects That Matter, whether it's something you would like to see, or if it's something that you would like to write. Maybe you're someone who says, well, you know, I actually would like to write something for you. So we accept that as well. And we compensate our writers too, by the way. So yes, but the Objects That Matter is very popular. And I feel like when in doing this work and creating the fashion race database, it's been a blessing and a curse, because it's something that was so sorely needed. And you've got, when we're talking about race, you know, we're not just talking about Black communities or the Black experience. There's people, you know, South Asian, East Asian, Indigenous, South American. There's so many people who have a stake in this and have something to say, or they're angry and they feel like this is a space for them to, you know, kind of address these issues. So they want to be present and they want to write something. So we get requests coming from everywhere. And I don't think people realize how small we are. We want to address everything for you, and with all of these different cultures and traditions and ethnicities. And so, I mean, we've just been overwhelmed with all of the requests and people wanting to kind of speak about their lived experience there. Please describe a significant turning point that has informed the trajectory of your work. Gucci. So Gucci. So 2000, the end of 2018. I'm going to be honest with you. I was giving up. I was living in New York. You know, mind you, I graduated in 2013, and it was really fun up until 2018. But for anyone who's lived in New York, it can be brutal. It is an obstacle course. It is tough. It's true when they say if you can make it there, you can make it anywhere. But you know, when I mean, and this is almost a separate conversation, but when you're in the arts and in culture industries or academia, it is not known for paying well. It is not known for paying you in a way that you can survive. And I kept my head above water for a long time. And I hit a wall in December of 2018. And I just kind of made a bargain with the universe. I said, January or February 2019, I'm quitting. You know, I love this work, but I can't survive doing this work. I've been trying to tell the industry that I can help them. I've got something to offer. I've been trying to make more money. I've been trying to, you know, just survive doing this. But at that time, the industry was not really interested in academics. And, you know, there just wasn't a whole lot there. Lo and behold, suddenly in February, I literally get a phone call, and it is the new school saying, you know, Gucci's here, and what are you doing right now? Can you, you know, if you want to talk about a pivotal or significant moment, what are you doing? Can you come over right now? You know, for, you know, they're here, and the rest was history. And suddenly, my life turned around in the course of 4 days. They scooped me up. And they saw that I had value to bring. And I was getting flown all over the world to places I've never been before in my life and speaking before audiences. And the Gucci effect was profound, because once that happens, you know, everyone wants to talk to her. You get this whole new respect from people, or, you know, for the most part. But it just catapulted my career after that. Suddenly, people were ready to listen to me, and they thought, okay, if Gucci's going to listen to a lecture from this part-time professor, it just, yes, persistence. It really took hanging in there to the last minute, the 11th hour, when I was ready to pack up my bags and call it quits. I did it all. I mean, I did brutal teaching schedules, teaching classes, like 3 classes back to back. The same class, like 3 sections where you're just repeating your same lecture over and over for 2 hours back to back. It was draining, but I loved students so much, and I loved the work I did, that it didn't really feel like work. But I mean, that was pivotal. That was sort of the saving grace. And then everything else, it was like you're driving down the street and all the lights just turned green all of a sudden after that. Are there any books on Mahali in the database? That is a good question. I know we've got Mahali, the exhibition, in there. Mahali has a profile in the directory. You may have to look. so you may have to go into the database and search. And so and look, but it may, I'm not sure. That's a good question, because also when I'm running this, we've got a research team and they're adding things in there. So I've been busy steering the ship, so there may be something that has slipped in there. In your research, what culture do you think has been the most appropriated without recognition from fashion houses or in regards to fashion theory? The most popular objects that matter post, if you go to the database and click on objects that matter and you see the list of objects, our now graduated research assistant from summer 2020, Adriana Hill, did a piece on, or a post or an entry on the Great Plains Indian headdress. And if you don't know what that is, and not to reduce it, it's really kind of the grand headdress, like a chief's headdress with the feathers. There is something about that piece that has been misappropriated over and over and over. We have pictures of it. I mean, you see it on the model Carly Kloss strutting down a Victoria's Secret runway. That is not how it was supposed to be worn. It was worn by Pharrell on the cover of, I think, Elle magazine. You name it. The singer Kesha years ago wearing it. I mean, you see it everywhere. That there is something about that piece. I mean, Cher in the 1970s. Or, if you want to talk about one of the most misappropriated pieces, at least that we have right now in our database, I would say without a second thought, that one. And when we posted it on Instagram, because we do kind of a partner post to it on our Instagram account, that may have had one of the most likes that we've had on any of our posts. People reacted. They all knew what it meant. They all knew when they saw that, and they just all thought, yes, that piece. Who are African-American male designers? Oh, good question. I want to build that out on our database. There's so many. Patrick Kelly, if we're going to get historical. Patrick Kelly, Willie Smith, Stephen Burrows. When I first moved to New York and started as a student, and I wanted to get out there and start speaking, I was very kind of precocious. When I graduated, I just started doing talks, and I did a talk with the Museum of the City of New York in 2013 with the great Stephen Burrows twice, because there was an exhibition on his work called When Fashion Danced. I've got the book behind me, and he autographed it to me. And he was really famous in the 1970s. And so it was called When Fashion Danced because it was just such a moment that the clothes that he made, really kind of working with materials like jersey, among other materials that clung to the body and were made for dancing, for going out. I mean, he was a young man at this time and going out with his friends in New York City. And so it was called When Fashion Danced because it was clothes for dancing and really having fun in vibrant colors. So yeah, and oh gosh, there's more design. Jeffrey Banks, who's more of a designer, and he is significant. I've had the pleasure of meeting him a couple of times. Jeffrey Banks, who's now retired, was really one of the first Black designers. He was scooped up in the late 60s by Ralph Lauren and Calvin Klein to work under them, and they kind of took him under their wing, and then he started doing his own thing by the 80s and went on to become a very successful designer, more in a commercial way. Also Jay Jackson, who my colleague Rachel Fenderson, again, Rachel Fenderson is an excellent example of when you do not see history, or if fashion history does not recognize your designers, you have to build the exhibition yourself. And that is what Rachel Fenderson did. Rachel Fenderson graduated with the same degree as I did at the Parsons Paris location. She decided to do her thesis on Jay Jackson. And hey, Daniela, we've got Fashion Race Database people in the house. Daniela is invaluable to the Fashion Race Database. She is our social media manager. She is a community builder. I don't know what we would do without her. And she always has an answer. She's always so resourceful. But Jay Jackson, she wrote a thesis on Jay Jackson and then created her own exhibition on Jay Jackson in New York City, which is in Brooklyn, which is no easy task, which just really tells you, if no other museums wanted to do an exhibition on him. And so she resurrected his legacy. She tracked down his former partner and got the portfolio of his work from like the 1970s and 80s and gathered images of his pieces and mounted them on the wall and created a whole memorial to him. Again, if you don't see it, you build it yourself. And she did just that. But yes, I'm seeing also in the chat, Virgil Abloh, if you want to get more contemporary. I mean, there's the list goes on. But also Black women designers like Elizabeth Keckley, who I partnered recently with Instagram, also to show you what you can do with this work as a professor. In my work had become so public that Facebook and Instagram had kind of found me. And we did a partnership where we transformed a fashion history lesson of mine into partnered with a TikTok star, Taylor Cassidy. So, and I don't understand TikTok yet. So it was a match made in heaven. So I provided a mini lecture and Taylor Cassidy gave you the TikTok. So she acted out my lesson on Elizabeth Keckley, a woman who was born into slavery and is, I mean, really kind of paved the way for American fashion in the 1800s. So you had Taylor Cassidy giving you this history lesson, which is fabulous because she gets to kind of share this story with a new generation of people who would have never heard of Elizabeth Keckley, but also Anne Lowe. I mean, the list goes on. How many people do we have working on the database? Is there a whole team? There's a whole team. It's about 5. There's me, Daniela Hernandez, who's in here, Rachel Kennard, who is our project manager, Kai Marcel is our research assistant right now. Laura Beltran Rubio is our researcher also. Kaya and Laura are the ones who you see uploading new sources to the library and writing some of the objects that matter. We have a new member, Anthony Palipembril, and he is our content editor extraordinaire. And I mean, among other things, he really helps get the content tight and is accepting contributor pieces and making sure we've got new fresh essays on the way. Oh gosh, I hope I'm not forgetting anyone. RJ, our web developer. I mean, he doesn't really consider himself a team member, but I always drag him into this conversation because he is. He built the database. It was just me and RJ in the very beginning a year ago. And I just told him, this is what I want the website to look like. And he took all of my dreams on a Google Doc. It was just an outline. And then I pointed to some websites that I wanted it to look like. And he just waved his magic wand and he is still there with us. He is our IT person. He's fabulous. So that is the team right now, but we're very small. And since we have limited funding, if anyone wants to help us with funding or know any philanthropists or anyone who wants to support us, we will accept that, but we are kind of limited. I want to expand the database to have more in-house writers and researchers and get more opportunities for interns, like students during the summer to work online because COVID, as we know, has just kind of blown things up in a way that, you can learn anywhere, you can work anywhere. So I really would love to be able to compensate researchers and writers to work with us. How much have you explored Spanish colonialism and its treatment of race and fashion with regard to Black bodies? Oh, you are going to love Laura Beltran Rubio. Our in-house researcher, Laura Beltran Rubio, who is a PhD candidate at the College of William and Mary, focusing on Latin American history and fashion history. She has been doing, if you look her up on our database, you'll kind of see the screen will kind of populate with all the work attached to her. She has, thank you. She has added so much. Again, this is another reason why the vision, is I can never do all this myself. I'm not interested in doing this myself. I know that I do not have the capacity or knowledge to speak about Spanish colonialism or the Latin American experience. That is where someone else can shine and bring in their expertise. I can't speak appropriately to a queer experience or a Jewish experience. And so that is why I try to bring in these researchers where they can just have a ball and just work at the database, almost like a public laboratory, like an online laboratory, and do the work that they've always wanted to write about. So Laura, to answer your question, look up Laura. And also we have a section called reading lists, which is under the library on the website. And she did do a couple of reading lists about that. Reading lists is where we give you kind of a quick and dirty, like 5 sources on any given topic, just to get you started if you're curious about a certain topic or theme. What does Black fashion mean to you? We've been forced to pull from so many cultures that sometimes I feel like we get lost. Yes, Black fashion is ingenuity. Black fashion is resilience. Black fashion is powerful. Black fashion is colorful. It's flavorful. It is influential. It has shaped American fashion as we know it. It is transcendent. It is universal. When we are seeing, sorry, my Sonos music just came on out of nowhere, like a ghost just put it on. Sorry, I'm trying to get it to stop. Okay. It is just transcendent. Hip hop, jazz, all of these styles. Even like when Beyonce did Beychella, I guess her Coachella performance that you can see on Netflix, when she was doing this homage to HBCU culture, HBCUs meaning historically Black colleges and universities, the rich culture within HBCUs, the dress that they would wear, the dancers like the J setters, the girls who, I went to an HBCU for a year, the Black college experience, like on the field, like the band that she's referencing, the music bands, a Black band is very different. And the dancers, it's just a whole different experience. And so when she is referencing that style, the dance style, the clothing, the attitude, you could go on and on. So, there is a reason that it has been appropriated and borrowed from constantly, for better or for worse. But it's just, there's nothing like it. What company do you like most as far as fashion? It depends. I'm not sure who I really, Gucci was fun to work with, but I've been interested right now. Tommy Hilfiger, which came as a surprise, I'm gonna be honest. And they're approaching us and what they're about and what they're into, and PVH, their umbrella, where they're taking things and getting to interface and get to know the team members, which is very diverse, the team that they have. I was very surprised. I don't have a closet full of Tommy Hilfiger. It just wasn't the brand that I thought, fashion and race, Tommy Hilfiger. But the work that we're doing, especially shout out to Randy Cousin, who is a Black executive at Tommy, who is just really leading the change there. And the people we've worked with, they're really fabulous and sincere. This isn't like a trend where they're just trying to latch on to us. They are really sincere about that. So, so far so good. Things have just started, but they're just such a warm group of people, very transparent, and just, they have big visions and ideas, and they get it. They see what we do, and they make that connection of knowledge is power, academic and industry. Yeah. Like they don't think that that's crazy. There's many brands that just think, no, thank you. I don't want to do that, or I'm not interested. So their brand, so, not so much about the clothes, but who they are and what they stand for. Designers that I really like though. I'm kind of a terrible fashion consumer, to be honest. Growing up, I love vintage. I wear mostly vintage. This is a vintage dress. So I'm a terrible consumer. I don't go shopping a lot. I go to vintage stores and secondhand. I love things that have a story. People give me things, and I wear student work clothes that students are making for a final project. I wear it. So I love things that are built with meaning. So I'm terrible at kind of going off and shopping all the time. So I can't even tell you many brands. I've got Gucci, but I really love Batsheva, Batsheva. I started wearing Batsheva dresses. Her name is Batsheva, in New York. And I started wearing her dresses before she became famous. And and by that, I mean, I was trying on dresses in her bathroom, in her Upper West Side apartment, and just kind of, and meeting her at a moment where, she was just really wanting some visibility. And then she got it, and now she's big. And I mean, her dresses are so fun and quirky, and it's this Laura Ashley kind of old school Victorian collar. It's a look. And when you see it, there's nothing like it. So I'm a huge fan of Batsheva. I have 3 Batsheva dresses. So I really love Batsheva. Do you think the fashion industry is learning? Gucci, for example, going from the blackface sweater to hiring you. That is a good question. Are they learning? I mean, I've had numerous brands that I haven't even mentioned to you who've reached out since last summer. Some of them stick, some of them drop off, and that's telling. They have low patience, or they don't have the capacity. They realize the work is more than they thought it would involve. So it's, some of them are learning. I'm not sure. I'm just now kind of at this stage, I've kind of lost patience, and I am working with the companies that are making the effort to work with us and stick with us. So like Tommy setting up a whole brand partnership, that's great. The longevity of it, it's a long game as I see it. So, I'm not into the whole one and done, or, hey, can you do a workshop for us? Or, I'm not interested in that. Or, hey, let's just do this quick partnership on Instagram and that's it. Or let's just throw some Black models on our Instagram, for this shoot that we did. And now suddenly we're diverse and we have addressed all of the structural issues inside of our company. No. So it takes a lot more than that. So we've got a few more questions. Our white daughter and her family were stationed in Ghana for 2 years, where they bought wonderful art, jewelry, baskets, and fabrics. How have your projects been influenced by African art? How have our projects been influenced by African art? It's interesting. That is something I've been thinking through. I was speaking with a colleague who's African, and in dealing with Africa, you really could have a whole database on African fashion. Because when I was speaking with a colleague, she was saying, why race? And that really stuck with me because, when we're talking about race, especially in North America, for her, as an African woman, there's police brutality going on in Africa right now, or there's various issues when it comes to harm or exploitation, infighting that happens in Africa. And it is not the way we would describe it in the US, where it's kind of white police officer, Black man. It is Black African police officers killing Black African civilians. So what I'm getting at is, when you're speaking about a whole continent, the issues of race is very different. In fact, that's not always the best word to use, race, because they have a very different experience. First of all, it's incredibly diverse when it comes to design, cultural influences over the last several hundred years, whether it is Muslim, influenced by Islam, whether it's influenced by Europe, North America. There is just so much there that I do grapple with it, because it's not enough to just kind of explore or examine or describe African fashion in on the fashion and race database, because oftentimes when we're talking about race and racism, it's just a different sort of context. So so that's a good question, but we do have some pieces in Objects That Matter, the West African Boo, the oh, Daniela might add it in here if she's still in here. There's a tote bag, the Kiondo. We've got a bag in there. There's some pieces we've got, and numerous sources in the library that you can find on African fashion, African culture, colonialism. I mean, we can still have that conversation in the context. You know, you may not be able to make the argument all the time about race and racism. Thank you, Daniela. In Africa, but you can certainly talk about colonialism. So, so we've got pieces there. It's also interesting, and this is just a little side argument here. There's also some tensions, and I'm going to tell you this from an academic standpoint of what the climate looks like right now. And that is, at least if we're doing Anglophone work, so like just like English speaking research, there are countless white scholars who have become specialists in Asian art, in African art. And that has been creating a tension that has hit us at the database also. We've gotten messages by people who are angry, who are African or Asian, and they're upset that white scholars who have specialized in their culture and have written whole books or journal articles are stored on our database. On my end, I need a holistic perspective. I'm not giving you the full picture if I'm not showing you all of that. You know, you know, the work is still important though. If a white scholar is doing that work, you may not like it, but at least having those pieces in our library by these white scholars is something you can at least react to or argue against. You know, if there's something that you want to, if you want to write a volume on African fashion, whether you like it or not, those white scholars from the past or present have shaped the discourse of Asian fashion or African fashion because they're writing about it and they're shaping narratives or, you know, or talking about it in a certain way. So we've got to have it. If you want to lay out on a table this whole conversation, that needs to be there. But I just wanted to mention that too, because that is an issue as well, which also speaks to systemic oppression, you know, where you have white scholars who had the privilege to get their BA, their MA, their PhD, and then go get a job or a fellowship and decide, I'm gonna specialize in Chinese fashion. I'm gonna specialize in Nigerian fashion. And then they get a job as a curator, you know, or, you know, whatever, or a professor, and then they become the expert. So, and then you're looking around wondering, where's the diversity here? Where are the actual Chinese people, scholars? But I mean, they, you know, they could be speaking in their own languages and in their own, you know, regions, but this is kind of what the state of this looks like. Thank you for the amazing lecture. Thank you. I would like to know in what ways you have encountered the need for lawyers and or legal matters in your line of work. I am pursuing a career in fashion or media/entertainment law. I'm also curious about how you think current college students can find their own path in this field, particularly in research. I'm truly both left and right-brained, so I am double majoring in finance and media communication studies and find it difficult to pursue such diverse paths. Well, you were in luck because one of the fastest growing fields is fashion law. So coming out of New York and getting to know, build a great network and community in New York, I got to know the people, the good people at the Fashion Law Institute. Susan Scafidi helped found the Fashion Law Institute at Fordham University. And not to say they're the only ones, but there are several classes you can find, universities carrying these courses and new kind of fields or majors that you can find now in fashion law. And I mean, I know you're speaking of like entertainment law, but that is just to say you're actually asking this question at the right time because You may not see it around you right now, but if you really look, there is going to be a hot market for fashion law, fashion lawyers, and the media and entertainment lawyers. Now that we have these new crops of young creatives coming out, they need help. With tensions running high, in the last few years, cultural appropriation becoming such a hot button issue, where people are becoming increasingly territorial or defensive about their work, and sort of wanting to litigate these things. There is going to be some demand for people who actually speak that language and know how to do this work and can do that wayfinding for a creative who just wants to be a creative and say, this is your IP, or you might want to look out for this, or you need a contract for that. So it's incredibly important. So you're really in the right place at the right time, and I encourage you to pursue that. And it might take a little bit of cobbling, but I know people in this field. The Fashion Law Institute, for instance, has been putting on clinics and trying to create supportive spaces. I know this is fashion law, but if you want to see what this looks like, I recommend that you go to the blog Fashion Law, the Fashion Law. It's written by Julie Zerbo, and it's fabulous because she just built her own space. Julie Zerbo created the Fashion Law blog. It's a website that she now runs. It's become quite successful. She also has an Instagram account. And so that can give you sort of a snapshot if you want to see thank you, Danielle, and Cummer Museum. If you want to see, what does this look like? What is someone who's working inside this field right now? What are they talking about? What could you talk about? Do I want to create my own blog about this? Use Julie Zerbo as sort of a model for doing that kind of work. Does your work also talk about the fashion models and how many designers are hiring Black models? Sort of. I have been consulting since last summer with a modeling agency, actually. The work that I've been doing has kind of pulled people from different parts of the industry. And I've been very lucky because in working with these companies, I'm working with a very popular modeling agency in New York. And they've got some of the top models in the world, and they talk about what they've been dealing with. And I did one-on-ones with their Black models, and it's a crisis what the Black models are going through right now. And it was great working with this agency because the CEO and the managers for this agency, they were wondering, they're saying, Kim, what do we need to do? What do we, can you give us a talk or a lesson? What needs to be done here? How can we do better? And how can we inspire our fellow model agencies to do better? And also when it comes to designers hiring Black models, you can't force anyone, but thankfully, the designers who get it and understand that cultural diversity is just smart, it's just a good business move if you have to make it about a bottom line in business. It's just smart business, like the Christian Sirianos, who have diverse models of various sizes and skin colors. They're the ones who are the most successful and just laughing all the way to the bank, because and Christian's doing this sincerely too, of course. But I did an interview. I spoke with him on stage, Christian Siriano and my friend Becca McCarran, the designer behind Chromat, and we were talking a few years ago at FIT, and I asked him about that, hiring diverse models, and he just said, it's just good business. He's like, I don't understand how my fellow designers are wringing their hands over putting a Black model on their runway. That is ridiculous. And of course, you've got Black designers who are creating these spaces for Black models as well. So you've got that. Oops, sorry, I have this one call. Okay. So our last question is, can you talk a little about the music and fashion in the context of race? For example, the minstrel shows, Broadway musicals, or pop music. That kind of falls in line with historicizing cultural appropriation or misappropriation. Minstrelsy, the performances that, if we historicize it into the 1920s and 1930s, and of course beyond, of like white musicians or performers going in blackface and performing as a Black figure, you know, mocking and mimicking Black musicians, or wanting to borrow from jazz and the music dances, or white female dancers borrowing from what the girls in Harlem and the Harlem Renaissance were doing, and trying to dance and move their bodies around in the same way. You see that continue to happen in the 1940s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s. There's a book I've been wanting to read. It's been on my queue for like 7 years. It's called, you know, so I'm going to softly recommend this, but, you know, full disclosure, I have not fully read it, but I've heard nothing but good things. There's a book called Round Midnight. And on the cover is a picture of Mick Jagger with his arms folded, kind of laughing or smiling in conversation with Chuck Berry. And it's a book about those kind of power dynamics and how rock and roll completely lifted its style, most of its style and attitude from Black music, whether it's blues or soul, and became popular for it and ran all the way to the bank with it. And they became famous for all of that. It makes me think of the documentary I saw a month ago. I don't know if any of you saw it. It came out exactly a month ago, actually, the Tina Turner documentary, which was brilliant. And she talked about the struggles of, in the 80s, trying to make it as a musician. Of course, she was older by this point in the early 80s, before her What's Love Got to Do with It, you know, just kind of, you know, smashed records. But, you know, they said what the music labels were saying about her, and I will not repeat it, but one of the record executives had this horrific thing that he said when one of the executives she knew, he was trying to pitch Tina to him, and he basically was just saying, nobody wants to see, you know, a Black woman on stage or trying to be Mick Jagger. So yeah, you know, so it's really interesting. If you, pardon me one moment, I just have someone at the door. So sorry. This is what happens when you speak from home. But I mean, and so that's kind of moving a little off topic, but just speaking to music and fashion and race. But really just seeing, I think that I recommend that documentary that just came out called Tina, because it really kind of just shows what kind of a Black woman was going through during that time, especially in the world of rock music, you know, the space where people thought you don't belong here, which, as I was just saying, she absolutely belonged there, because Black culture had really shaped and created rock music. So, we have also, to answer your question, one of our past guest contributors, Esperanza Humphrey, she did she wrote a beautiful essay for us that if you go to the Fashion and Race website and go into essays, she has a article she wrote called it's called Black Chorus Girls, Fashioning the Black Chorus Girl. And so it also just shows the chorus girls of that time. Thank you, Daniela. And so you can learn also that's like a great blend of music and fashion and race right there. And our last question, do you wear African attire? I don't think I have anything. There was there's a Maasai collar, like this Maasai collar necklace that I got at an Afropunk festival a few years ago. But then now it's kind of like a wall hanging. I just was like, I'm not walking around wearing this. I didn't know how to wear it. I just felt inappropriate wearing it. So unless I fully know the context of something that I'm wearing, then I'll feel comfortable wearing it. But I would love to wear African attire. I just want to wear it proudly. So it's given as a gift, or I fully know why I'm wearing it or purchasing it. I know the historical context or the social significance of it and things like that, which I hope we all do. Just like our food, you know, just knowing where things come from. Thank you so much. All right, so we're gonna wrap up now. I want to thank you for spending this evening with me and at the Cummer Museum. I'm so thankful to the Cummer Museum. This is so fun. This was really great questions. You all had me really in the hot seat there for all of this, but this was wonderful. Thank you.